everyone, a big welcome back to the Nick Elston Show, Season 6, Episode 7, and another amazing guest to bring you this week. Hot on the heels of Faye Dicker last week, her of BBC fame. Amazing episode. Thank you so much for your engagement on that, by the way. I have another whiz when it comes to communication and presenting. I'm having a theme here. The one, the only, Mr. Dave Harries.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Very nice big up introduction there.
Well, you're worth
it. I quite deserve it.
You do absolutely deserve it. You see, and I know this to be true because I end up kind of interviewing a lot of people that I've never met in person. I think it's the wonders of the modern age. But you I've actually met in person, and I actually booked you to deliver a talk to my audience, the first event after lockdown and pandemic and everything else. So one of the real bonuses of that period for me was meeting you. You came and delivered a really fantastic talk about why kind of podcasting, media presenting is so important, especially in the speaking world. And I'm just really impressed by you generally. Your contributions on the day were fantastic as well. So before we dig into everything that's Dave Harries, the world of Dave Harries, tell us where you're from and what you do and what's brought you to our virtual door today.
Well, thanks, Nick. I'll try and keep this bit short. In a nutshell, I started out after I did a music degree at university. I was a musician, and then after university, I joined the BBC. So I was a trainee studio manager a long time ago, to the extent that we were editing our radio programs with razor blades and such like. So it was this pre-digital just, and so I worked at the BBC for a number of years, and then, long story short, I left the BBC, went freelance, was still doing production for the BBC. I worked in classical music world for quite a long time, recording orchestras and that sort of thing. Then I moved to the United States for a few years. I lived and worked in Chicago and worked for the BBC over there as well as NPR. And and sort of basically got back into the broadcasting side then, did a lot of production, and I worked with another British producer who I met in Chicago, and we had a little independent production company there. Then I came back to this country, carried on with that freelance work, and then set up my own production company and moved into the world of web video, really, because it was at that time, this was about 12 to 13 years ago, things were just beginning to take off. Video was becoming incredibly important on the internet. So I set up a little company to try and take advantage of that and to offer people my services as an interviewer and communicator to create corporate video and that sort of thing. And that sort of brought me where I am today. I mean, now I do podcasts as well, going back to my radio roots, but I still run, to this day, I still run a production company and make a lot of video and podcasts for corporate clients.
Amazing, Dave. Thank you. So, sorry, we just had to sort out a technical issue there with the screen. So if you're now having some form of seizure because you were watching the screen on the video, apologies, and all claims can be submitted to. No. So hopefully that's all sorted now. But thank you, Dave, so much for that kind of intro. And wow, what a background that you've had. Vast experience. And I want to dig down into all of that. But I want to take you a little bit further back than that, just to kick off with. So tell us about baby Dave. Tell us about growing up. Tell us about family life, education, whereabouts you grew up, and what took you through to the first steps of the professional journey, as you shared already.
Well, I'm very touched that you think I can remember all that, at my vast old age. But yeah, I was. I mean, if we're really going back to the beginning, I was born in Edinburgh. I'm a Scot by birth. My mum is Scots and my dad is Welsh. I through a series of moves because of my father's job, I ended up growing up. Most of my teenage years and school years were in Cardiff in South Wales. So and there I got seriously into rugby because obviously, as you all know, Cardiff is the home of rugby. I don't know if anybody seriously disputes that, despite Wales's performance right at the moment. And so I was a great fan of rugby. I played it a lot at school. I was rubbish at it. It has to be said. There was never any chance of me doing anything interesting later on in life with rugby, but I loved playing it, and I used to go and watch it a lot. My dad would take me to what was then the National Stadium and the Arms Park, where Cardiff still play to this day. And and we it was good. I enjoyed growing up in Cardiff. It's changed a lot since I left there. It's now a big sort of media centre, and there's lots of, and they've rebuilt the docks, and the harbour side has all been redeveloped, and none of that was there when I was a kid. It was all derelict. So it's improved a lot since I left, and some people don't think that's a coincidence, but there we are. So I really enjoyed growing up there. And then when I left I was lucky enough to get a chance to go to university, and I went to university in London. So I left Cardiff at the age of 18, I suppose, and then lived in London, did my music degree. I loved living in London. I really, really enjoyed it. I was right in the middle of London at the City University. So it was very exciting for a young chap like me to be in the middle of everything, and London is and always will be, I suspect, a very exciting place. And then towards the end of that degree, I then applied for the BBC and the rest of the history you kind of know from my introduction. But yeah, so I was so music obviously is important to me because I did the music degree. I played the French horn all through my youth, and was lucky enough to play in the National Youth Orchestra of Wales for a couple of years, and that was probably the best, musically the best thing I ever did. But I still play to this day. I still play in local amateur orchestras around where I live in the Stroud area, and get a massive amount out of music. It's my hobby. It's what I do when I'm not thinking about work, and I love doing it, and I feel very, very privileged to be able to do that.
I love that, and it certainly kind of aligns with that performance element of what you deliver anyway. Because even behind the scenes, it's kind of a performance. So you're conducting a performance.
Yeah, I think there's some truth in that. The obviously the communication side of what I do, whether I'm directing other people, as I do a lot, or whether I'm presenting myself, because I present a fair bit on video and podcast. And obviously that is a performance. There's no getting away from that, and I think you just have to accept that and get on with it. And obviously having played in hundreds and hundreds of concerts over the years and that sort of thing, I was never really particularly bothered by that. I quite enjoy it, if I'm honest. And I find, if I'm asked to do any public speaking, whether it's at a wedding or a funeral or at a business event, I don't mind doing that. I enjoy it. And I think I'm lucky because I've had the music background, and that's sort of made me conscious that it's okay to do these things, and it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult. And I know that's something you very much help people with as well. And it's once you've got the idea in your head that actually, I can do this.
Yeah.
Then, and I got that. I was lucky. I got that very early on in my career when I was, working. I realized that I could do it, and that it wasn't that difficult. It's so I love doing it, if I'm honest.
And the musical inspiration, was that self-generated, or was that from family, or where did that come from? That drive to be musical and to pursue music?
Yeah, my dad was a musician. He was a great although again an amateur musician. He worked for a living, not in the music world. He was in industry, but he loved music, and he played in several orchestras as well when he was a young adult, and later on when he had the children. And he also conducted. He conducted a couple of amateur orchestras, so he was always there, doing these amazing things. And when I was old enough, he said, what do you want to play? I don't think it was sort of, would you like to play? I think it was, what do you want to play? And I sort of, and he said, you thought about the French horn, because that's a lovely instrument, and it was one of his favorite instruments, though he didn't play it himself. And so I sort of went along with it, and I just happened to be okay at it, and loved doing it. So I suppose my dad was my musical inspiration. And my sister is also a good musician. She sings and plays the piano, and to a reasonable high standard. And she was, in fact, became a music teacher. So there's always been music in the family.
Oh wow, fantastic! You mentioned the work in the US. what did you find was the main kind of cultural differences, personally and professionally, from life in the UK to life in the US?
Yeah, well, there's no doubt that the United States is a foreign country. You're conscious of that straight away the moment you land there, whether you're on holiday or you're going to live there. And where somebody famously said, we're divided by a common language, because obviously the language barrier is present, even though you might think, well, everybody speaks English, and of course it's hugely helpful that we all speak a version of English. But it's funny, there was some very amusing incidents early on. One I remember when we were moving into our apartment, when we just a couple of weeks after we landed in Chicago to live there. And my wife and I we'd hired a van or something, and we were moving our what few possessions we took with us into this apartment. And we kind of turned up at the apartment and said to the doorman or the concierge, he said, where's the goods lift? So we could put our furniture in it and stuff. And he kind of looked at us like we were mad, and he said, the what? And he said, oh, the goods lift, and he was scratching his head. He didn't have the faintest idea what we were talking about. And then I sort of twigged, and I said, oh, I think maybe you call it a freight elevator. And he said, oh, the freight elevator, of course. Yeah, it's just over there, and it's like goods lift. Didn't mean anything to him at all, I don't know, so that's interesting, and stupid things like, we all know they call pavements sidewalks, for example. But what a lot of people don't know is that the road where the cars drive, that is often referred to as the pavement. And really? You hear it on traffic reports and things like, and the pavement's jammed up with cars, and as a Brit, you're thinking the pavement's jammed up with cars. And then you kind of figure out they're talking about the road, and it's like things like that, just daft little things. But above and beyond the language.
Yeah.
What I loved about America, and I did love it, I really enjoyed being there and made a lot of good friends there. But what I really loved about it was the sort of idea that you can do anything you want. And if you're prepared to put in a bit of work and put in a bit of effort, nobody is going to hold you back. And I don't think that is the case in this country, or probably in Europe more widely. I think, because we have these very ancient institutions and class systems and all those sorts of things, which can count against you, if you're from a certain background or you're of a certain ethnicity and that sort of thing. Whereas I think in America, that is much less of an issue, and you can get on with it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there is a great deal of racism in America. There's a great deal of, as we all know from the news, more recently, there are many problems in America. It's not perfect by any means. But one thing I did love about it was that idea that, whoever you were, wherever you came from, you could, if you were prepared to get off your backside, you could get things done. And I really liked that. But as I say, I don't want to paint a picture like it's some sort of heaven. It's not. There are plenty of issues there. But I had a great time. I was very lucky.
And in the world of kind of communication, presenting and doing what you do, hopefully you'll understand where I come with this. Do you think actually the British accent was a selling point for you?
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to pretend it was just my talent, but yeah, of course, the British accent does help.
We've had that same thought process, Dave. The work I do in the US is usually because I sound like this, not because of what I actually do.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's when you're in any foreign country, you've got to remember that you have a distinct advantage wherever you are in the world because you're different. Okay, and you can use that, if you choose to. So whether you're in China or Russia or US or whatever, the fact that you're not a native can be an advantage. Obviously it can be a disadvantage as well in certain circumstances, but people will take notice of you. And yes, if you talk posh, and you have a British accent, they do like the British accent in general. There are exceptions, of course, not everybody likes it, but most people do like it. And certainly in communication terms, it can be quite useful. So yeah, you stick out from the crowd a bit, and I of course I shamelessly use my BBC background. Even though I hadn't actually been full time for the BBC for a number of years when I went there, I was absolutely shameless about sort of saying, oh yeah, ex-BBC, blah blah blah. Because at least that is a company that every single person virtually in the world will have heard of.
Absolutely.
So you use it,
You do. On last week's episode, we have Faye Dicker, who is still a BBC presenter, and how that was kind of like at the spine of her career. Other things happened off the back of either being able to refer to that or use the experience of platform, that kind of thing. It's an interesting one, actually. We had the week before that a fantastic lady called Dr. Patian Tublin, who based in Baltimore in the US, but is essentially, in her words, a girl from Brooklyn, and how she's kind of worked in this kind of high performance kind of coaching environment. And I think that really does align with the message you said about kind of, it's very much kind of taught from an early age on how we can improve ourselves. One of those areas I think is massively underrepresented here, not just for personal reasons, but we don't teach things like or haven't until very recently. We don't teach things like public speaking at school age. At university, you do get opportunities too, and at college, but at school age, we don't teach public speaking. Whereas when I've spoken to clients in education in the US, from a very early age, you're taught how to be able to deliver and present in front of people. And we both know how important that is to both of our successes by our own definitions of that term.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the communication skills are such a useful thing because they kind of go above and beyond whatever your qualifications might be. Because you can be quite a brilliant person and fantastic at whatever job it is you do. But in most jobs, you need the ability to communicate that with other people, whether it's to teach people or just to pass on instructions or collaborate with other people and that sort of thing. So communication skills, being able to make yourself understood without pissing people off as well, and sort of, do it diplomatically and all that sort of thing. But those are such useful skills. And I think in this country, I think you're right. There isn't an emphasis on that certainly in our state schools, and I think perhaps in our public schools, in the private education sector, there probably is more of a. And you look at these, the kids that come out of those schools, and not that, and I didn't. I'm state educated, but I've met many people over the years, and I know my children. My eldest daughter's at university. She meets a lot of kids who are from that private education sector. And they come out with, I'm generalizing now, of course, this doesn't apply to all of them, but in general, they come out with huge amounts of confidence, huge amounts of sort of self-esteem. And part of that is communication skills. And, and we see it in our politicians as well, sadly. Some of them have excellent communication skills, without naming any names, but not necessarily much behind it.
Yeah.
So sometimes we can be a bit let down by that. But it's I think it would be a good thing if everybody was given some help with communication skills, how to stand up in front of a room, how to present. And it probably does happen more than it did in our day from an education point of view. I know my kids have had to stand up in front of the class and give presentations and things like that, so that can only be a good thing.
But as you said, it's alignment with personal development generally. You look at speaking with a capital S, it's not just about doing what we do, whether it's in the studio, whether it's on stage, it's about being able to deliver any message to anyone, whether it's one person at home or whether it's a million people on a video, and anywhere in between, because it does have an impact on our success by our own definition, but also being able to deliver it with clarity and power and emotion. I think that's the thing that maybe some forms of training bypass. We can hear a fantastically polished speaker, but then they'll say, run to the back of the room now, is only £10,000. It's very disingenuous. You lose people. Or we have that kind of scripted sales call that we know scripted, so therefore we don't really connect with it. I mean, this is more your bag than mine. Communicating effectively on a human level, surely that's where it's at, not this kind of scripted mentality, right? How do you help?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I agree with that. And I think I used to do a podcast until just before the pandemic came along, in conjunction with another Bristol-based person called the Communication Paradox.
Okay.
And the basic sort of thinking behind the communication paradox was that we have this dilemma in business, certainly, and I think in life to an extent as well, but this dilemma between wanting to communicate perfectly and wanting to communicate authentically. And those two things can sometimes clash. So, the temptation, particularly perhaps with social media and things like that, is to want to communicate perfectly, to always put forward, the best version of yourself or your business or your product. Whereas if we communicate authentically, my argument is that will happen naturally. So, in other words, if we be ourselves at all times, and we actually communicate in a way that is not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes, in the end, that will pay dividends. So, I'm a great believer in authenticity, and it's a word people who know me know that I use it a lot, and probably too much. But that podcast, which is still available, by the way, I think there are about 30 episodes of it, is all about, we interviewed lots of people about that, people who were interested in communications, whether they were from business or we even interviewed a guy who was a skipper on a round the world yacht, about the power of and the importance of communications for him and that sort of thing. Fascinating subject, which you can, it's almost endless what you can talk about with communications.
It really is. I mean, like I said, some of the environments I work in, even with the most troubled environments, so for example, the work I do in the prison service or with adults, children have had very poor experiences of male role models, or even things like domestic abuse, for example, even the art of communication, even though it looks differently in those spaces, is crucial, because it's the reason why the strapline of my business, Forging People, is transformation through speaking. It's changing the narrative to change the experience. And the most kind of eye-opening thing is, and I was saying this to a recent guest on the show, the most eye-opening thing about the work in prison, if you take away the security, it feels like a college. And when you listen to the stories, that actually the one twist, the one turn along the way that somebody else has taken or has been forced upon them sometimes, that just sends them in a different direction. What I found now, and I'd love to get your insight on this, is from a communication point of view, if I'm running one of my events or coaching public speaking, and I'm getting people to tell their experiences, they use their stories. So very much first-person perspective. When I'm doing the same work in the prison service, actually very often they share the stories of the people that they've impacted. So we can be owned by somebody else's stories. And I just find that for that form of communication, being able to change the narrative can sometimes change the experience of life. And that's a really big, deep question. I'll try to make that as clear as possible. So hopefully that made sense, Dave.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I tell you what it reminds me of is my days when I did work for the BBC and particularly in my freelance work in Chicago and in this country as well, interviewing people for radio shows or for documentaries and that sort of thing. And the first thing is you've got to remember that you are the least important person in that conversation. You're not there for your ego or for your, for people to find out about you. You're there to find out about them, to hear their stories. And sometimes they're pretty reluctant to tell them because they're not used to telling them or they've never had the opportunity to tell them. So I think, and I apologize if this is slightly off kilter with what you were just saying, but I felt my job was to give people a platform. And the way I could do that was hopefully to get them to trust me a little bit, and to, even though they might have only just met me, to say, well, to try and talk their language, to try and without, and that sounds patronizing. I don't mean it to. I don't mean talking down, but to try and just use the same language. Be there for them and actually make them, as I say, trust you a little bit, so that when you do ask them a question, they are more willing to open up about it. And I met some really remarkable people, even and I wasn't doing it for huge numbers of years, but before I kind of went more into the commercial sector, where, by the way, I still use exactly the same skills to do what I do in the commercial sector. But I met, for example, I was very lucky to interview ex-soldiers, veterans from the Falklands and things like that, to talk to them about their experiences of things. And some of those, it was absolute privilege to get to do that, and to meet some of these people and to get them to telling me stuff that they often never talked about before, and I'm making myself sound like some sort of really important psychologist or something, and I'm not at all. I mean, I wasn't, I feel very humble about this stuff. I don't think it was my expertise. I just, as I say, gave them a platform to express themselves, and their stories to me, they did change things. They changed the way I thought about the world. Hopefully they changed things for their world as well, because they were able to express themselves in that context of creating radio in that case. And I think that stuff really matters, if you can give people a chance and give people a platform, give them a voice, I suppose, people who wouldn't normally have a voice, then I think you're doing something, you're making some small contribution. And another example, forgive me, I'm giving you lots of examples, but
no, it's
just
great.
one that
this is exactly why you're on there. You're a fascinating guy. I told you that right from the start.
But this one really sticks in my mind. And I was working for local radio at the time, actually, as a freelancer, and I was doing a series about I think I'm just trying to remember what the original point of the series was. I think it was something like talking to people about end of life experiences and things like that. And one of the people I was very lucky enough to interview was somebody who did palliative care. She was a doctor and she was responsible for palliative care at a big hospital, and that was interesting in itself. But she introduced me to a couple who had very, very sadly lost their teenage daughter through cancer. And amazingly, they were prepared to speak to me. And I went along to meet them in their home, and we met. And they'd lost their daughter less than a year before I met them. So they were still very much, and their daughter was, I think, about 11 or something. I mean, it was very raw, very recent for them. And they opened up to me, and originally I just wanted to talk to them for a few minutes and use them as part of this bigger program. But in the end, I ended up making a program just about them, because they were so brilliant and they were so expressive and they were so glad to have the platform to talk about their daughter, if only to celebrate her life, which absolutely was worth celebrating. She sounded like she was a remarkable girl and had been incredibly courageous through the sort of latter stages of having this awful disease. And they got to express that. And it moved me deeply, that experience, because I was being admitted to this very, very personal world of theirs. And I can't tell you, what that does to you. You sort of, you say, oh, I'm a professional, I can deal with all this stuff. And you do, of course, but it does move you. It does affect you. And to this day, and that probably was 10 years ago, maybe even longer, that I did that. But I still think about them. I often think about them and their courage in talking to me, and the program we produced as a result of that, which I was extraordinarily proud of, actually, because they loved it, and it gave them a platform, and it gave a little bit of publicity for them and their daughter, who had passed away. And all their relatives and friends listened to it and loved it and all that sort of thing, And again, it wasn't through any great talent or fantastic thing that I did, other than giving them a platform and saying, talk to me, and they trusted me, and they did. So that sort of thing can really affect you and really move you. And it certainly did. And that is a highlight of my career. And it was only a little thing for local radio. I mean, it wasn't, it was never going to win an Oscar or anything like that. But to me, that was my Oscar-winning program.
I love that, and for them, absolutely, very much a therapeutic process as well to be able to do that.
I think so. Yeah, they certainly said it was, and hopefully, all these years later, if they've still got the recordings, I'm sure they haven't thrown them away. I made sure they had all the recordings for posterity, but and hopefully they can still get something from that even after all these years.
Profile Me is a super shareable mobile application designed to help professionals grow their personal brand. Proudly paperless, this powerful tool packs the power of web, social media, and messaging into one beautifully designed interface that offers a unique and human-centric way to connect and build trust with clients. Easy to share on any platform and easy to save to any phone's home screen. With Profile Me, getting referred has never been easier.
You strike me as a humble guy. I think that, so you probably wouldn't say this, but I will say it to you. I think what you've given them, other than the platform, which, let's face it, a lot of people can give them the platform, what you've built with them is trust and rapport. That they actually trusted you enough. You built that rapport with them where you showed you, and then they actually shared their experiences with you. And I think that's massively overlooked, I think, in not just humanity, but communication generally, is what we're looking to build with people quite quickly with communication, from my point of view, in terms of speaking and that kind of stuff, is commonality and community. You're showing to people. We need to get it quite quick as well, don't we? Always say in the first 10 seconds of any talk, try and get community and commonality. Why are you like me, and why should you listen to me, and what am I going to bring to you? Answering those kind of questions. I know, without even seeing that kind of play out, you would have given them that comfort right from the start, that upfront agreement with them about how it's going to be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, and that's very important. You do have to establish that bond quickly, and get their trust and get their agreement for you to be there, and obviously the fact that I was introduced by a senior medical person who they trusted, and she said, meet this guy. He's a nice guy, he's not, because obviously when people think journalism, they sometimes, think the worst, because there are some awful people around in that industry, in the communications world. And I had to tell them, look, I'm not here to do some sort of exclusive, bear all thing. I really want to know, what you went through. And as I say, I didn't even go there to make a program about them, but it ended up being a program about them. So yeah, I suppose that first 5-10 minutes is very important. And again, I think part of it's about being quite humble and and realizing that you're there. They are the important people in the room, not you. I think that because I've seen plenty of people over the years do it differently, go in as the sort of star interviewer or whatever, say, hey, I work for the BBC, I'm terribly important, and people can just shrink away from that if you're not careful. That's
the equivalent of a stage seller, isn't it? That's the person that kind of highly polished performance, but you cannot connect emotionally. Anybody listening?
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, and anybody listening to this right now and watching you and even your body language, that everyone just knows what you're about. You can feel what you're about. It's not about what you're saying, although that is a part of it, of course, but you can kind of feel what you're talking about. I love that. I think that's what really kind of drew me to you to start with when we were introduced online originally through LinkedIn, through the pandemic. The reason why I wanted to get you in to speak to people is because I just loved the tone, the vibe, and also what you were sharing.
Yeah, well, well, thanks for that, Nick. I mean, I'm glad that came across. And I talking to communications and giving a good first impression. I just noticed I threw this shirt on because I thought, I better put a smart shirt on for Nick, so I don't look too scruffy. And I've realised this shirt is not ironed, and I'm feeling very sort of self-conscious about it now. Think, oh God, people are going to think I'm such a slob,
But honestly, it's not a problem. First of all, you may set a trend. You never know. I'm wearing a jumper. We're recording this on a Friday afternoon. It's snowing outside, so I'm just going to dress up casually. But you could start a new trend. You never know. You look great, Dave.
Yeah. Unironed shirts. Yeah.
But personally, but actually, as an aside, let's do this. I very rarely, well, certainly through lockdown, I never ironed anything in 2 years. Very rarely had to iron anything nowadays. But it used to be all the time when back in kind of corporate life, like kind of. Yeah, iron certainly we've got fallen out of love with our relationship with an iron, but you look great. Don't worry about it.
Well, that's kind of you to say that, Nick. But I agree with you. I mean, I used to iron a lot of shirts on a Sunday night. I'd iron a week's worth of shirts. Right, five shirts on a Sunday night, and then the COVID came along, and the iron kind of never saw the light of day. So which I was quite pleased about. But,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we've spoken about your kind of personal and professional kind of background up until this point. Now, so what does kind of your day-to-day work look like right now? Like who do you kind of work with? What do you do for them? Tell us about kind of what you're up to right now.
Okay, well, this week I was down in Newbury a few days ago, recording some podcasts for a client down there, and so would have spent a day. I think we recorded four different podcasts with various guests and stuff. Now, in that case, the client themselves were hosting, so I was producing and helping them a bit, coaching them a little bit on the sort of presentation side. Obviously, I take the kit with me to a face-to-face podcast like that.
Yeah.
And then I bring that back and I edit that here on my own system here. I use Pro Tools for anybody who's interested for my audio editing, because it's a system I've used for years and years. It's probably a bit over the top for podcast editing, to be honest, but it's a system I know extremely well from my radio days, so I still use it. It's interesting though, because we're doing this podcast now here online, and you're recording the video as well, and that's great. And obviously during the pandemic, loads of these little platforms sprang up. Zoom obviously had a incredible renaissance and became incredibly important to all of us. And I started doing a lot of online podcasting during that time for my clients, and even video clients who could no longer do video said, well, let's do podcasting instead, and we would do that. And so, but now, a few years later, although I still do some online stuff, a lot of the podcast and all the video work is now back to face. We're in the room together, and personally, I'm delighted about that because I love being in a room with people and chatting to them and talking to them and hopefully giving them a platform, as we discussed earlier, and to me, that's a lot easier if you're in the room with them. You can do it online, of course you can, and we do, and you're doing it extremely well now. But I think the being in the room with somebody is so nice. It's much more hassle because obviously you've got to travel somewhere and everybody else has to travel to the same place. But it also, from a technical point of view, and I do come from a technical background originally because of my BBC training and stuff, being able to take along the microphones and the recording equipment and set it all up the way I want it, and to put up some blankets to deaden the sound in the room a bit and make it sound a bit more like a studio. Those things are nice because I have more control over the technical quality as well than online, where you're very much reliant on the speed of the internet connection and the quality of the microphone at the other end, and et cetera, et cetera. So the face-to-face thing is nice for me. And interestingly, there's now real crossover between the podcast side, which was audio only traditionally, and the video side. And I've been working in the last few weeks with another client who they asked to do a series of podcasts. They want to do, I think, 12 podcasts over the next year, but they want them all videoed, and they want them videoed in high quality, so to the extent they're prepared to pay for me to bring in a proper camera person with several cameras and lighting and all that sort of thing. And all those podcasts will go on YouTube as well as going on traditional podcasting platforms. So it's interesting that crossover is happening, and people want to do video and podcasting. And that's great for me because I'm kind of in pole position for that. I've been doing both for years. So
double bubble.
So happy days.
Yeah. I guess the final kind of thing I want to throw in, and you mentioned about in-person energy, and again, I had this conversation with a client this morning of coming away from lockdown where everything was virtual for obvious reasons, but we now live in quite that hybrid world. Like you say, very often now my events are in person, but beamed back to kind of virtual working. I think trying to maintain energy is a tough thing online, isn't it? With delivering online sessions. The event that you attended in Bristol, my event, was the first one after lockdown. And I don't think people realize how much they missed in person, even for the introverts in the room, like myself, weirdly, until we actually got to that point, because everybody came in wearing a mask. And even though we got the floor safe because we had it all to ourselves, within 5 minutes, everyone was just going like hugging. It was a really weird thing to see humanity kind of open up again, because we got very kind of guarded against contact, didn't we? In person,
we did, and I think we had not really realised how much we missed it. Because we'd all got so used to doing Zoom and doing this sort of thing and Teams or what have you, And walking, I mean, because obviously that was for me as well. That was one of the first sort of in-person events I'd done for a long time, and for me as well, it was absolute joy just to be in a room with other human beings and to to say, oh hi, this is what you look like in person instead of just on a webcam. Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And in the end, if I could have a choice between online and in person, I'd always choose in person because that suits me. But I know that's not true for everybody, and that's fair enough. Some people like being sat at their desk with just the camera, and they can turn the camera off if they want, and just have the audio, and that's okay. That's fine. But for me personally, I just love being in a room with lots of people.
I agree. I always say it's good enough, but in person's better for me, as you said, because a lot of it's energy transfer, really, isn't it? I guess from
and I think in your profession, where you're helping people with public speaking, I mean, energy is everything, isn't it? And that how to read the room, how to sort of get feedback from the room, and to prosper from the people in the audience, and that is all 100 times more difficult, if not impossible, when you're doing it online. Absolutely. It's certainly, I think I do much better, much more enjoyable podcasts and videos when we're in the room together,
absolutely. I get that. I mean, that's one thing I've not really considered, is actually the in-person podcast. That sounds quite cool now you come to mention it. So we will be having a conversation away from here. Stay tuned, everybody.
Yeah, else.
So, Dave, before I let you go back into the wilds of Stroud,
okay.
I'm now going to set the scene. I'm the MC of the O2 Arena in London. 20,000 people have paid their hard-earned money to come and hear you do your thing. You're sat back in the green room, sipping a beer or Prosecco, what would typically your choice is. You hear me call your name, the crowd goes wild, and your walk-on music comes in, the song that motivates you, that lifts you, that gets you at peak state. What would your walk-on music be and why?
Okay, well, listen, I'm going to be really sneaky now. I'm going to give you two answers.
Okay.
Because when I was with you, and we did that thing that you referred to, that seminar that you ran, I chose a song called Brighton Rock by Queen, which is off their second album, I believe, and or possibly third. I'm not sure. Sheer Heart Attack, anyway, is the name of the album, and it's a song that I've always loved ever since I was a youngster, and and I was trying to play the guitar in a very bad schoolboy band, and I just loved that. I love Brian May's guitaring in it, and obviously Freddie Mercury's voice and all that sort of thing. The only trouble with that song, as I realized when we used it that day, is it has quite a slow intro and it doesn't kind of get going. So I think we'd have to start it a few bars in, just to sort of get the crowd going. But yeah, anyway, that still remains my favorite song, and I'd still be very happy with that. But the reason I want to sort of hedge my bets a bit is that, I think I want people to know that, I have kids and they keep me up to date with music, not very well, I'm a massive fan of Dua Lipa, for instance. Okay. Now, I know that I am definitely not her target audience. I'm probably more than twice her age, but I just love her stuff, and particularly her most recent album, Future Nostalgia, I think it's called, and I love every track on that. So I might be tempted to choose a Dua Lipa chat. And then in passing, I should also say that I've become a massive fan of Hamilton as well. And I know that's not, I'm not sure that's walk-on music, but I just love Hamilton. I love anything by Lin-Manuel Miranda. I think he's a genius, frankly. And and my daughter introduced me to that as well. She used to listen to it, and she said, "Listen to this. What do you think of this?" And then she persuaded us to go and see it in London before lockdown. And I think it's absolutely is a work of genius. So if anybody listening or watching hasn't seen Hamilton, it's on Disney Plus, and of course it's still on in the West End. So go and see it.
What an answer! A lot of thought gone into that.
Sorry, it was a bit long-winded, really cool.
Really, really good. So, okay, Dave Harries, thank you for being such a great guest. Big round of applause.
Absolute pleasure, Nick. Thank you very much for asking me on.
It's been fascinating to hear your journey, and said more power to your elbow as well. The world needs better communication now more than ever, actually. So more power to your elbow, indeed. To anybody who's kind of tuned into this, whether it's on video or audio, you want to reach out to Dave. I know Dave will be happy to hear from you. Please do connect, look at his stuff, follow him, whatever he takes to do to get you into his world. Do that thing. And I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I have. So hit subscribe, like, and all that jazz, whatever it takes to get you back here next week. You know, I'm not a details guy. I don't know what that looks like. Dave's probably the guy to talk about that kind of stuff. But for now, from me to you, see you next Monday. Have a great week ahead. Take care. Be happy. Cheers, guys. Bye. Bye.
Cheers.